Now the last piece that we want to talk about, and I'll wrap things up here, is cooling. And this is real simple. I mentioned that, we have millions and billions of cycles per second taking place inside of these little chips. So they get quite hot. And if they get too hot, well, then they just completely burn up and cease to exist. So we have to have some form of cooling. Now, the most common form of cooling that you'll see in today's computers, well, even in old computers, is using this thing called a heat sink, okay, which is the metallic object, which is an object that sits on top of the processor and is designed to draw heat away from the processor. Okay, that's what the idea of the heat sink is. It's designed to pull that heat up and away from the processor. And the fan that you attach to the top of the heat sink will then blow that heat further away. And to be more specific, it will then coordinate with other fans inside of the box, right? The actual box that you build your computer inside of, all the circuits, circuit boards and everything are inside of. That box will also have fans to help airflow keep flowing through and the heat stays away from the processor. By the way, this is a big mistake that I've seen a lot of people make, and that is that they will install the fan backwards. When this fan spins, it blows air, right? That's what a fan does. And what people will do is they will plug in the fan to see which way air is flowing. Or sometimes the fans will actually list, they'll actually have a little arrow on them that actually says airflow goes this way. And what people think about is they think about as a human, if I want to be cooled off, what do? I take a fan and I blow it on me, right? I want that breeze blowing on me and that cools me off. Well, you have to understand that humans work different than processors. Okay, humans sweat. And so when you blow air onto that sweat, you are cooled. Whereas with the idea of the processor here, it doesn't sweat. So blowing the air on it, it may cool it a little bit. Creating a breeze on something may cool it a little bit. But what you really want is not to have the fan blowing down onto the processor. You want the fan blowing the heat away from the processor, right? The heat's coming up through the heatsink. You want to blow it away from the processor. So besides the heatsink and fan, something else that you should be using with today's processors and today's computers is something called a thermal paste. Now I have it illustrated for you here on the right in the form of, you'll see it's just called heatsink compound. Okay, it's basically just a paste that you put on the top of the processor before you put the heatsink down on it. And really all it is it's this compound or this paste that is designed to help, again, induce the flow of heat up into the heatsink. Okay, again, in the old days, we used to just use a heatsink and fan. We didn't worry about the paste. Now the paste is much more important. Okay, so these three things kind of go together. But there is another form of cooling, and that is liquid cooling, right? I mean, I already mentioned that humans, we cool by sweating, right? By having liquid on us. Well, the idea behind liquid cooling is that you will have some form of liquid. It could be water. And what's going to happen is you're going to run that liquid through a metal block that sits on top of the processor that's, again, absorbing the heat, right? So what's going to happen is the processor is getting hot. You have this metal block that's on top of the processor that is going to be like the heat sink. It's going to absorb the heat. The liquid, so we'll say the water, will get hot, right? This block will heat the liquid. So the liquid then needs to run out of the block and into some form of a cooling system, which you'll notice the illustration of what I have here would be fans, right? You have fans that are cooling the liquid so that the cool liquid could then feed back into the metal block. So you basically have this constant flow of liquid. So the liquid goes in, it gets hot, it comes out, it gets cooled off, it goes in, it gets hot, it goes out, it gets cooled off. It always looks really super cool. It's a great way to show off to people, make them look like you have a really cool computer. And I guess that's pun intended, right? It's a cool computer, because we could say cool as in neat, or we could say cool as in, well, it's cool, it's cold, right? It's keeping the processor cool. So anyway, that's how we cool the processors, and that does take us to the end of this lesson. Okay, so I think I probably went a little longer than I would have liked to have. I told you this is not the most exciting material, but it's important material, so I had to get through all of it. And you really want to understand the absolute basics of how the processor works, or how the brains work in a computer, so that you can know what makes everything happen. What makes it that when you ask things to happen on a computer, they actually happen. All right, so that's it. I thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next lesson.